I'm a self-taught guitarist and keyboard player. Not a very good one, but I think sufficient enough where I don't need to bring in any other players in the course of my music making. And everything I learned by myself really. It's all self-taught. So, this is predating YouTube really. And the thing we used to do when I was at high school, we'd have these tab books, these guitar tablature books with like Iron Maiden and Metallica songs and Guns N' Roses songs in there. And you'd basically just play the guitar parts along to the cassette. And that's how we learned to play guitar. And I think the standard is pretty high because a lot of these songs had quite complex solos, quite complex parts. So, you play the record from start to finish using the tab book, and that's how you basically learn to play guitar. It's more useful than sort of having a teacher. I mean, no one had a teacher really. Playing to your favorite records and playing in bands was how you learn. And, I got a keyboard for, I think, my 16th birthday. My parents got me this cheapo Yamaha PSR thing, which was just a horrible keyboard, but it had all these sounds in it. And again, I just pick up and start playing these like piano house tracks that were really big at the time in the late 90s. And that's sort of how I learned to play keys, really, like a pub piano player, playing all these sort of classic, what would now be considered classic house tunes. So, that's kind of how I started. And, did I have a mentor? No. The teachers at school hated me, and all I wanted to do was skip classes, get high, go to raves at the weekends. And so there was one teacher, I think his name was Mr. Totten, and he was the music teacher. And one day he saw me in a practice room, and I was bashing out this piano house stuff on these old teaching pianos they had at my school in Belfast. And he came in and he said he was so surprised that I had any ability to do anything beyond just waste teacher's time really. And I guess you could say he was a mentor in a sense. I mean, he was the only teacher that ever really encouraged me to do anything, and I won't forget that. So for me, I think it was probably getting played on BBC Radio 1, and that would have been either Pete Tong or A Track on doing a mix on one of the specialist shows. When I first started out, Radio 1 was everything, and particularly sort of Friday night, Saturday night plays. And if you were to be emailed by somebody, a producer from Radio 1, to tell you that your song was going to be played, you knew that it was going to be prime time. And for me, that was really the very early pinnacle. It meant so much, not just on a personal level, but on a professional level. That feedback from drive time, peak time radio would be enough to propel your track into beyond the sort of club world really, and you could potentially cross over into something bigger. So, that was always a really big thing for me, Radio 1. I don't know how relevant it still is. It's probably not anyway near as relevant as it was, say, 10, 15 years ago. But, for a lot of us and a lot of folks now as well, it's a big one. Well, we all know that it's incredibly frustrating to receive the downloading 4 or downloaded 3 out of 5 feedbacks. And, there's a lot of PR agencies out there that will take that as meaning it's some form of support. It's not, it's lazy. And I think and I've been guilty of it in the past as well. I think if you are feeling something, it's good to give feedback. And if you're not, that 1 out of 5 sort of style feedback from someone with no feedback there is also equally unhelpful. So I think if you can try and listen to a track that you've been sent from start to finish and give some key feedback as to why it's not for you beyond the stylistic part of it, if you can do that. I mean, obviously, if you're a house DJ and somebody sends you an electro track, you're going to, the default position will be, it's not for me, it's not something I would play. But if you are qualified to give production feedback to somebody, then I think it's important to do that. And I always try to do that. I get hit up a lot on my personal channels by folks, and I can't always do it. I used to respond to almost everything I was sent. Nowadays, if it's something that's just way off the mark, then there isn't really anything constructive. It's not my role to give any constructive feedback on that. But if it's a club record that somebody sent me via a promo list, then I'll add some. I'll try to be constructive about that and add a few lines in there, arrangement, production, and ultimately why it is or isn't for me. I think that's those 3 points are probably as clear as it could get. Under Principleasure, I mean, I had plenty of records out before that, but my first Principleasure release was the Hexagonal Dab EP, and it was a 4-track EP of sort of slow electro, and the lead track, Hexagonal Dab, was probably, and still is, my most played track, both on a club radio and Spotify level. And you know, it's a very slow track. It's less than 110 BPM. My feedback now, if I listen back to it, would probably be entirely technical. It's a very short song. I think, you know, getting that into like at least a 12-inch mix or something that had a little longer of an intro and outro is super key, and there's no doubt that an extended mix would have helped me probably get more club play on it. I think stylistically I'm happy with how it sounded, and obviously launched my career as Principleasure, but from a mix perspective it was quite middly. It was engineered, if you like, to work on a mobile phone, and that's one of the challenges we face at this moment, is having a record that sounds great in a club and has the right frequencies for a club system, but also cuts through on a mobile phone or a laptop. And the way I mixed that first EP, the frequency sat in this range that worked really well for tinny mobile type speakers, perhaps not so well on club systems where the mid-range needs to be scooped a little, and maybe one needs to think about the bottom end and the high end a bit more. So I'd probably revisit that and, you know, think about how that might translate into a club environment. I'd love to spend a day with Dave Gilmour, not necessarily on a studio level, but just to be there and pick his brains. I think on a technical level, Vince Clarke would be fun, you know, from of Erasure fame and obviously early Depeche Mode, and you know, what he's done with synthesizers and the sheer technical profoundness of his recorded output. I would love to sit with him and get my head into his head and how he formed the sound of so many of these iconic early records. And of course his musical output transcends way beyond the sort of pop stuff that most of us might be familiar with, and he really would be one of my sort of production heroes. So I think that would be real fun to spend some time with Vince Clarke in the studio. Well, I think it's got to have to be a musical object, because I have my studio in Los Angeles, which some of you might be familiar with, and obviously there's a lot of gear in there. What's the one thing I couldn't live without? Well, technically I could live without all of it if I have to be pedantic about it, because anything and everything I have can of course be done quite effortlessly in the box. I don't think there's anything I have that's particularly unique to my sound, but the one thing that is hard to replicate, two things in my mind, are analog compression and some of the outboard effects that have become so commonplace in my sound and that I revere so much. So I'd probably have to go with something a bit obscure like the Eventide H3000, H3500 harmonizer. It's just got this beautiful gritty sort of 80s quality. It's a multi-effects unit, but it's primarily reverb, delay and pitch shift based. And it was one of the very early digital units that went way beyond its rivals, if you like, in offering this really beautiful thick soundscape. And if you guys are familiar with Valhalla plugins, for example, I would imagine they are modeled very much on that early hardware. So that's a really irreplaceable one for me, and they're getting harder to get one's hands on. So the harmonizer, Eventide harmonizer H3000 would be the one. I genuinely have no idea, because there's not really much else I'm good at. I dabble in music technology, and I've done a bunch of stuff in that area. It's still music related as far as I'm concerned. It's still part of my grand repertoire. Man, what would I be doing? I have no idea. I wouldn't even know where to start. You know, I'm at a stage in my life where I almost feel like it's too late to start on anything else. So music is all I have, really. That might not be the politically correct answer here, but yeah, music all the way for me.